Jamie, go ahead and get started.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Um, I'm coming to you live from the UP of Michigan, so a little colder than the country we're about to talk about here. Um, I recently traveled to Costa Rica back in November, and I can't say enough good things about this place. So, Costa Rica is probably one of the top places people travel when they travel internationally. They're for their first time. There's a lot of species that are different without being overwhelming. So you get a ton of tropical stuff. It's a great intro country. As you can see here, it's incredibly beautiful. Just a stunning country, pristine rainforest. The people are very friendly. The country's very safe. There's modern infrastructure, incredible food, um, great mammals, reptiles, amphibians. They use the dollar. I mean, there. I could go on and on about why Costa Rica is such a wonderful place. But Costa Rica with a camera is very different than Costa Rica for birding purposes. There's a lot more things to keep in mind. First off, just a general preparation for your trip. And this would apply to any trip you take to the tropics. There's a list of things here. If anyone needs a copy of this list, I'm happy to email you after the program. If you want to drop your email in, that's fine. Do note that Costa Rica currently does have some travel restrictions due to COVID. That is forever changing. So make sure if you're planning a trip abroad, and not just to Costa Rica, that you're checking the State Department for the US and the country you're traveling to. You have to currently purchase travel insurance, and it's very specialized travel insurance that you can only get from a couple places. So just make sure that you're looking into that before you get there and you're surprised at the airport. Lots of things that are common sense here: raincoat for yourself, your camera. The weather changes a lot. One of the most unexpected things for Costa Rica is it can get rather chilly. You think, okay, tropical climate, that's great. I'll take, shorts and a t-shirt. You get to higher elevations in the country. They've up to 12,000-foot volcanoes there. So you get into some pretty chilly days. Not a bad idea to have some layers, wicking clothing, sweatshirts, hat, maybe even some gloves for the chillier mornings. Um, Another thing to note, there is some interesting car insurance deals if you're going to rent a car. Just check the fine print. Insurance you have in the US is not valid for Costa Rica, so while it may look very cheap, you're probably paying twice that additional just for the rental insurance, which is required. So make sure you're reading the fine print on this stuff. Um, and most of the people there speak some English, especially in town in the bigger cities. Not a bad idea to carry a Spanish English dictionary if you're going to be traveling out to the countryside. One thing I do want to note is Costa Rica is not like walking in your backyard in the Midwest in Ohio, like where I live. There are things there that are very dangerous, so it's something to keep in mind. Never go out at night without quality muck boots on. There are a number of very incredible, very amazing venomous snakes, but it's not the type of thing you want to step on or run into while you're casually looking for birds or wandering around. Just take precautions. It's not as mild as it is here in the States. So once you have your normal packing gear, of course, the camera gear list is very important. You definitely want your longest telephoto. Something that does well in low light as far as camera body. You get into some very dark situations in the jungle. Modeled light can be very tough. You're shooting very low shutter speeds. Portrait lens for that beautiful landscape. Macro lens, there's a lot of opportunities. They have incredible plants, insects, very small, poison dart frogs, things like that. Things that would be maybe tough to capture with a big telephoto. Anti-fog spray, that's a big one. You ride around in an air-conditioned vehicle all day and hop out and it's humid and your whole gear gets fogged up. So a few things to think about here. Again, I can email this list if anybody needs it. I cannot stress enough the importance of a tripod. Even these capuchin monkeys would agree that a tripod's pretty awesome. It's going to help a lot, again, being able to lower your shutter speed in those dark situations. So what to expect when you're getting in. Oh, real quick. So here's an example of why the tripod is so important. We're in Carrara National Park, and you can see the settings here. I'm at 1/30th of a second, wide open on my lens, ISO 5000, and this bird is still very, very dark. So this is one of those reasons why a tripod is just of the utmost importance. As far as in the field photography versus feeder photography, Costa Rica is great. There's a ton of photography setups. There's a lot of feeders at different lodges, restaurants, people's houses, but not all birds come to feeders. So you have opportunities to get some species at feeders, but what about all the rest? So there are challenging conditions to go out into the field and get these birds. So you have to be hyper aware of your light situation, your backgrounds. One of the many reasons that we partner with local guides in the area who are just spectacular, because they're going to take you to places where the birds are, so you're not just wandering around staring at the canopy and hoping to see something. For the places that do have feeding stations, not all of them are great. So just because there's a feeding station doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have the best opportunities. So lots of things to think about, and we'll discuss that as we get through the slides here this evening. Couple quick facts about the country. Over 900 species have been seen in Costa Rica, which is more than 10% of the global population, which is mind-blowing. I mean, this is a country that's the size of West Virginia, and you've packed all of these birds into one spot, which is why it's one of the most appealing places to travel to. Huge amount of biodiversity as far as all things, plants, animals, insects, amphibians, reptiles, accounting for 5% of the whole world's population of diversity. I mean, that's mind-bending. Very cool. There's also some active volcanoes, which you can take a couple tours of. So even if you're not a hardcore dedicated birder or photographer, there's other activities nature-based as well. So here's kind of what to expect so you've arrived in the country, you're going to get to your lodge or hotel. They're beautiful. The grounds are wonderful. Hotels are very much like the US hotels, except for they have incredible stunning gardens full of birds, which is wonderful. It can be a great way to kind of break yourself in when you get there to kind of wander around the grounds and see what type of species you're seeing that are different from the States. And some of the food that you can expect. There's a typical breakfast there on the left with some amazing fried plantains, and just a typical dinner with chicken, rice, and some veggies. So now that you've arrived in the country and you're at your lodging and you're super excited and you've got all these new birds, it's very easy to make mistakes. And you start forgetting all of the things that you were taught to do. Like Brian here, who is shooting directly above his head at midday into the canopy. Oh, I'll forgive him for this one since we were shooting a crested owl at the time. But it's easy to suddenly, all those things you've thought about learning in your photography, where you've practiced, patience and waiting for the right light angle and a good background, seem to go right out of your mind as you run around excitedly trying to capture all the new species. And it's good to take a moment and remember, probably get some more opportunities, deep breath, don't take a bunch of shots you're going to delete later. Here I have a Tennessee warbler, and this it was somewhat surprising to me how many US birds you actually end up seeing, especially over the winter months, as a lot of the breeding birds in North America overwinter in Costa Rica. And it's very easy to get super excited and start firing away at whatever you see, thinking everything's going to be new, when in fact, many of these are birds that you can see right in your own backyard during the summer months. So take some time, slow down, remember to check your field marks and things like that. Not that I don't love photographing Tennessee warblers, but it's easy to forget that not everything you see is going to be brand new. So a couple of the real common birds, this will probably be the first bird you see driving down the road to your hotel, and this is a great kiskadee. They are all over the place. The national bird of Costa Rica, a clay-colored thrush. A blue-gray tanager. So it's amazing, even their very common birds are incredibly stunning. So here's a map of Costa Rica. It's not a very big country, but it's broken into different states. We're going to go around the country and kind of look at some of the opportunities that each area presents, so you kind of know how to plan your own trip if that's something you were thinking of. So we'll start right outside of San Jose in the Central Valley region. I was really surprised to get out to this area and find it looking a lot like Ohio farm country. It's not what I expected. I expected everywhere to have rainforests and mountains and volcanoes, but that's okay because it provides some really great opportunities for some species that you can't find anywhere else. This is an American kestrel that we see at home, but gave me a good opportunity here to do a small in the frame shot with some of the mountains distant in the background. Barn owl are somewhat common in these open areas as they're hunting the fields in and around the farm country. So you can get some really cool opportunities. This isn't a bird that you would see in the middle of the rainforest, but since there's all this open farm country and rodents, things like that, gives you some interesting opportunities. So there's not a lot of feeder setups in this area, so almost everything we did in this region was field-based photography. You can see here how tough the conditions are. You've got bright light spots of light coming in through the canopy. You've got some distracting branches in the way. And this is a white-whiskered puffbird. This is a great bird, and I was very excited to shoot it. But sometimes you just need to take a minute and look around and see if you can make some changes in your location to help the photo a little bit. So all I did was look around. I moved about 5 feet to my right and was able to find a spot that had no light coming in through the canopy. So then I was able to capture a really nice clean background on this bird. Full disclosure, I did remove in Photoshop the branch that went over the bird's head. That was a lot easier to do when I just had green in the background and nothing else. So when you're out and you're doing this stuff in the field, take a second, look and see if there's any other opportunities where you can move left, right, maybe get lower, maybe get higher, and provide yourself with a little different opportunity that ends up in a better shot. This is a stripe-headed sparrow, and we were out on just a road. This is actually the kind of purplish gray looking background here is actually the road behind the bird. And our guide that day actually folded the plant over and was able to create kind of a nice perch and then gave us a distant background. So use what's available to you at the time to kind of give yourself a better opportunity. Here is a turquoise broad motmot. And in my original shot, if you can see up here in the left-hand corner, there's a very dark branch. That was actually running right through the back of the bird's head. And all I did was move a little bit and was able to get a much nicer shot. Here is a rufous-tailed jacamar. And here's some of the other things. So this is some of the stuff you see with the infield photography. These are very much documentary shots. The long-tailed manakin here on the right, it's noisy. There's branches everywhere. It was incredibly dark. You've got canopy breaking through. And no matter where I moved, this was the only opening to shoot this bird. So I was able to capture it, but not necessarily in the way I wanted. So when you're out in the field doing this photography, you really have to almost lower your expectations some because there just may not be a great opportunity for you. There are other opportunities besides birds though. So, don't spend all your time focused on looking for birds. We were just driving through and I happened to glance over and see a troop of howler monkeys and spotted a baby howler that was adorable. It was very curious, came kind of close, and I was able to get some really nice shots. So we're going to move from the Central Valley over to the coast, to the Tarcoles River and Carrara National Park region. The Pacific coast is hot. I will warn everyone in advance, if you are heading to this area, pack sunscreen and a sun hat and moisture wicking clothes because it is very humid and hot over here. Stunningly beautiful. You can see the Pacific coast here with the very mountainous shoreline. And I mean, just amazing, dense tropical rainforests, which accounts for a lot of that heat and humidity, but it provides some very interesting opportunities. This is the Tarcoles River. We were able to use a local guide to go out on the river. I will say that Costa Rica is doing an amazing job with social distancing and mask enforcement, everyone on the boat at all times. It was just us, actually. We all stayed apart from each other. Everyone wore masks, and that's the case throughout all of Costa Rica right now that I experienced. This is probably one of your best chances for boat-billed heron. When you're on a boat, you're kind of limited. You can only go so close to the shore. You can only go into certain places wherever the river goes. So you have to just really be patient for the right opportunity. And having a private guide gives you a lot of choices here. You know, you can say, hey, can you turn around and go back? Can we stay here longer? Can you move forward? Can you move backwards? And, you know, when you're on a big group with a big group of people, then, you know, you're kind of at the mercy of whatever the captain decides to do. So it's something to keep in mind, worth paying maybe a little extra to get a private tour. Here's a bare-throated tiger heron, one of their most common herons. This is a spot where you can get some of the specialties that you can't find anywhere else, is a mangrove vireo. This is a huge crop, by the way. I wasn't this close to this bird, so I just managed to get a shot I could crop pretty heavily. Green kingfishers are pretty common, much smaller than they look, but just huge bill, wonderful birds. I'll take a second here to talk about exposure modes. A lot of times when I have consistent light, I will be in manual mode if the light's not changing. In these sort of conditions, auto modes are going to be really helpful. So I was in shutter priority while I was on the boat trip because you're changing all the time. So you're going around a bend and suddenly you have shadows or then you have light. For this particular shot, I've been shooting in a dark forest in the mangroves, and then the bird flew by. So I lifted my camera and all I had to do was bump up my exposure compensation. And then I was able to capture the shot without changing all of my settings. So as you move locations, be mindful of what you're going to be doing, what type of setup you're going to need. If you're standing in one spot and the light's great and it's the same and there's no clouds, manual mode's a great option. But on some of these where, you know, you're hiking a lot or you're moving locations, one of the auto modes might be very helpful, so you can get the shot a lot quicker. Here's a laughing falcon, a yellow-headed caracara, which are very common in the area. This is a mangrove warbler. It's actually our yellow warbler, but you can see the red here. This is a young male, and he's just starting to get the coloration in. Mangrove swallow. We were also treated to a mangrove cuckoo and a mangrove hummingbird, which are incredibly hard to see sometimes. Unfortunately, we couldn't get any shots, but it was still exciting to see them. Here's a very tiny pygmy kingfisher. This bird was buried. It was pitch black in there. I think this was shot at 1/30th of a second just to get this shot. And we're sticking lenses through mangroves trying to get a photograph of it. And you just got to make the best of the situation. You know, slow your shutter down, watch your breathing, watch your technique. You know, you couldn't have tripods on the boat. So you're hand holding, hoping for the best situation and trying to do everything you can to make sure you get the shot. It's a barred ant shrike and a common black hawk are really common in the area. A cinnamon becard, wonderful bird. I would have loved to have had more time with this one. But when you're on a boat, you can't necessarily track them down through the woods when they fly off. Other opportunities too, you got a caiman here. And over at Carrara National Park, we did a big hike in for manakin. I was hoping for all species of manakin, but would have taken quite a lot of extra time. I was lucky to get 5 species on the trip. And this is a red-capped. If you ever have a chance to look up the video of these birds, kind of do an Elvis move and kind of like dance down the branch. It's wonderful. You should check it out on YouTube when you get an opportunity. But very, very dark in Carrara. the tripod was so important to have here. Luckily, the bird sat still long enough for us to get some focus. But again, shot at, I believe this is 1/40th of a second, and this is ISO 6000. So it's some very tough shooting conditions. We have a little black and green poison dart frog, incredibly poisonous. I think I read it has enough poison to kill 8 adult humans. So while it's fun to photograph, you certainly don't want to be touching it. From here, we're going to leave the Tarcoles region and head down to the beautiful Talamanca Range. This area is fantastic, and my cell phone picture here certainly doesn't capture the beauty. Just the trees, the landscape, it's probably the most beautiful part of Costa Rica, in my opinion. This is a avocado orchard. The local guides there partner with local farmers who keep tabs on the birds in this region. And then you're able to go and see some of the quetzals and things like that, but you do have to have a private guide to go on these tours. Here is a typical feeder setup. Not all of them have as much as this one, but you can see in this area the overhang here, no beams in the front, which is great, so you can line up wherever you want. Here's a second blind. You can see how it covers, so if it rains, no issues. And then in the background, they have metal posts that you can insert different perches in. It's really nice. They do a really nice job at this location, catering to photographers and using nice perches. So of course, the most wanted bird in this region, and many times the most wanted bird in the whole country, is the resplendent quetzal. Incredible, incredible bird. We were able to see a couple males. They never really came out in the open too well for us. But the female here that's situated right in the middle sat and displayed forever, just turned around, yawned, flipped around again. And just when they fly through the forest, they just light up this emerald green when the light hits them. They're just an exquisite animal, and everyone should try and see it in their lifetime. This is probably one of my most wanted birds of the whole trip. This is a golden-browed Chlorophonia, and I many times look at this picture and try to convince myself this bird is real. Has kind of this lilac cap and yellow, green, teal, blue, like it's just amazingly beautiful. And I spent some time watching this bird and the others that it was with, and it would sit and feed very, very quietly in the orchards. So you would kind of walk through and accidentally flush them initially because you didn't even see them there. They would sit very still and they would just kind of quietly pick at the fruit. So once I learned that, I slowed down and did a lot of scanning before I just started stomping through the orchard and was able to track a couple of these guys down and get some really up close, intimate shots. They weren't spooky. You could walk right up to them. So, you know, as excited as you are to see some of these things, if you just slow down, watch the behavior some, you may be able to pick up some photo opportunities you wouldn't have otherwise. Some long-tailed silky flycatchers, one of the specialties of the region. Truly beautiful birds. This is a female on the left and a male on the right. Not all feeder opportunities are the same, and this is one of those situations. This particular spot is a restaurant, and they have just one little feeder platform set out, and it's not in a good location. The background's not very good. It's just sitting on kind of an ugly post. So you have to improvise when you get to these places, and they're maybe not as ideal as you would like, but they have a fiery build arasari. You've got to get creative. So don't be afraid to do things differently. You know, I decided to just do a headshot of this bird. And by just focusing on that part, I was able to crop out the bottom part that was not as attractive. A little bit of backlighting here. You know, a lot of people talk about always have the sun to your back. Make sure the sun's behind you. And that's a great motto to work with, but there are times where it's fun to do something a little different and to have a little bit of the backlighting here, and some of the plants kind of have a light rim lighting on this exquisite flame-throated tanager or flame colored tanager, um, it just adds a little something different to the image instead of every image looking the same. So a lot of times when you've shot enough, start looking for other opportunities. Where else could you shoot? How could you do things differently? And you may come up with some interesting opportunities. You can see the rain falling here in the background too, which is kind of a nice touch. And as much as these pre-set perches, I'll go back here for a minute. If you notice this perch, this is something that was picked out. It's put in a post. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. But this is more natural habitat here. This bird was just feeding in a garden. It landed on the stem of this beautiful pink flower, which is cropped off at the top here. But I kind of like including some of the natural habitat as well. This is what this bird does in its normal daily life. They don't just show up and land on pretty perches and pose as they're going about their lives. You know, this is the sort of thing that they're doing. So as much fun as the perches are, I like some of this stuff too. So, you know, if you're at a feeder setup and you're shooting perches, don't be afraid to walk around a little bit. There's a ton of birds in Costa Rica and a lot of opportunities. Here's a shining honey creeper with some great legs on it. I would note that as much as I like this image, I dislike the fact that I cannot see the bird's feet. So when you're out shooting, keep an eye on that stuff. Make sure you're not, you know, now I have a legless yellow stick-legged bird instead of, you know, its cool yellow feet as well. Watching you're not clipping off a tail, clipping a wing. You know, these little details are what really make an image, you know, exceptional versus just pretty good. Here is a silver-throated tanager. And I went vertical here. Sometimes I have to remind myself, you know, you shoot horizontal all day, to flip the camera occasionally. You know, I've got this long branch here that covers the length of the frame. Shooting this horizontal wouldn't have covered all of that cool part of the branch. So just keep in mind, shooting horizontal over and over again, that's fine, but there's other options too. Don't be afraid to shoot some vertical. Behavior is a really neat thing to capture. I mean, a lot of these shots are great. They're, you know, posing on the perch. They've got a great head angle, but the behavior stuff is so interesting. And hummingbirds in Costa Rica are crazy. They're very aggressive. They're constantly fighting with each other and doing territorial displays. This bird was displaying aggressively towards a second bird that was trying to come up and land at this spot. And this bird would go feed and come back and land at the same spot over and over again. So I just kind of positioned myself in front of his spot and waited for somebody to try and knock him off his hill. And he said, no way. And I got this great shot with this is a lesser violet ear. So he's got his little violet ears out and his tail fanned and kind of a come at me bro look. One of my favorite shots of the trip. Working with a matching palette is always nice too. This is a female white-throated mountain gem. And I noticed the leaves around her really matched. You've got some orange and red and yellow, and to go with this buffy chest, I just really set this image over the top for me. This is a common Chloraspringus, and the reason I chose to keep this particular image was I really like kind of the spotlight effect behind the bird. Many times, you know, you shoot 10, 20, maybe more pictures of the same exact bird, and how do you decide what to keep and what you don't? Well, you know, you go through the list. Is it sharp? Is it in focus? Is the background clean? Do I have a nice head angle? Is it exposed correctly? When all of those boxes are checked, you start thinking about, well, what else matters? I can't keep every image I take of this bird. So what puts it a little over the top? And for me, you know, this is a little unique. You've kind of got a little highlighting here that really puts the emphasis on your subject. So while it's hard to choose, sometimes it's easy when you get a shot like this. It's a tufted flycatcher. And the lighting was never great on this bird. There's a lot of green in the image. This is a yellow-faced grass quit. And this is one that I walked away from the feeder and I'm more in the field, but it was the only shot I got of this bird on the trip. So sometimes you take what you can get. Here's another behavior shot. These are sulfur-winged parakeets. And when they would come into land, when they landed, a lot of times they'd do a wing lift. So I just waited for them to fly in and was lucky enough to capture one with wing up here, which was really exceptional. Even the common birds, this is a chestnut collared sparrow, which are everywhere. You'll see them all over the place. Including some of the habitat with the bird can make for an exceptional image, even of a common bird. You know, you've got this beautiful limb here, you've got these purple berries, and I went a little looser in the frame. Not every shot needs to be an up close in your face portrait. So be open to other options. Capturing behavior, again, is just one of my favorite things. It's the slaty flower piercer, and they're actually a parasitic bird because they're not helping any other, they're bypassing the pollination process for this flower by biting the stem and drinking the pollen right out of the base of this flower. And then hummingbirds will come along behind it and drink out of the slit that have the shorter bill, like volcano hummingbird, because they can't reach in these big long pink flowers. So very interesting bird here. I mean, the flowers survive. There's other pollinators, luckily, but cool to capture it actually piercing the flower. And there's a second male here. These are both males, the darker one, the female here on the right, bottom right. It's worth mentioning that if you are down in the Talamanca Range area at San Gerardo de Dota, definitely get some trout. It is fantastic. The food there is incredibly excellent. Happy to send anyone restaurant recommendations if they need it. Check out this awesome brownie. So from here, we will head back north and head over to Rancho Naturalista. Rancho Naturalista is a stunning place. It is just beautiful. The lodge is one of the most beautiful places I've ever stayed. It felt like I was at home, except my home's not this beautiful. Just a very comforting feeling. The staff is amazing. The food is delicious. But Rancho is set up as a birding location. So as beautiful as this is, and you can see here, this is the feeding station here that they've got right where you're eating breakfast. Of course, I end up skipping half my meals. I jump up to photograph instead. But it's not necessarily great for bird photography. But there, at the same time, this location is one of the few spots you can get some of the species. So you just have to be flexible and figure out ways around it. This is a snow cap. Actually, I'm going to go back to this last slide. If you notice, these perches are really pushed back up against the background. A lot of times you want to have, if you have a set distance, say 100 feet, you ideally would like your perch a third of the way out and the background 2/3 behind it. That's going to offer that beautiful clean background that looks so nice. But sometimes that doesn't work out, so you have to make exceptions. So this is a snow cap. It's the cutest hummingbird you'll ever see, and they are really common at Rancho Naturalista. It's a magenta-throated wood star. It's unbelievably beautiful. And luckily they have a ton of hummingbird feeders and some perches set out. While this is not my favorite perch, it doesn't even matter because this bird is absolutely incredible. So white-necked Jacobin, there's probably 100 of them at least on the property. Sometimes things don't always cooperate weather-wise in Costa Rica. On this particular night, it rained. And when I say rained, I mean poured and for hours. So we could have skipped the afternoon, but we noticed that a lot of these birds started bathing. So they were sitting on the branches and they're getting covered in water, and then they're shaking their wings back and forth. And we captured some really incredible action of these birds shaking and bathing. And so just because it's dark and rainy, have a glance around before you just go to your room for the night, because there may still be some opportunities. This is a green-breasted mango. I love how matchy he is to his environment here. One of the best spots to find white-collared manakin, They're a tough bird to photograph. They do not like to come out in the open. They stay far back. They're not call responsive, but I did find these great little berries that he was feeding on and was able to capture a quick shot of him before he shot back in the woods. Rancho does have a nice little pool of water, which a lot of birds came in to bathe and take a drink. This is an orange-billed sparrow. They're incredibly spooky for whatever reason. And a white-lined tanager. And you can see how the background here, it's not distant, but I still like this big broadleaf green plant. Very cool. And again, the background's not distant here, but they have these great pink plants. I wish I knew the name of them. And I was able to mix this in to my background and just give it kind of a unique look. A social flycatcher out eating some berries. And sometimes you have to be willing to go kind of above and beyond. Here is Brian, who waded out into the middle of this river to track down some sunbittern, which is the area around Rancho Naturalista is one of the best spots to observe this incredibly stunning bird. And here it is here doing a full display. It was upset that a green heron had flown towards it and fanned these incredibly patterned wings out. What an opportunity. What an amazing bird. So we will leave Rancho Naturalista and head north. The Caribbean Slope is another hot spot, and I mean that in a lot of ways. It's toasty warm, but the birds are good too. We were able to visit a really great place that rescues macaws, both varieties, scarlet and great green, are on site. And what's interesting is they feed these birds, the captive ones, and because of it, the wild birds come in too. So when we're hundreds of macaws, and it's such a great, it's a nonprofit place. They're doing tons of rehab for not just birds, but they also had a couple pumas. They had some other mammals on site that had been hit by cars or had other injuries. So they're doing great work, and I was happy to support this place. And these birds are wonderful. They're not shy. They're funny. They're inquisitive. Had an amazing time shooting them at this location. And, you know, you don't always have to do the traditional shot here. I was able to get a really super up close of the feathers, and you can see just how stunning this feather pattern is. It was one of the few spots I did track down a southern lapwing, great looking bird, and green ibis. And this bird, while it looks black, you can see some real iridescent here with the dark blues and greens. And you got to watch your exposure on these birds to get that black. So always want to check your settings real well before shooting anything super white, super black. It's a little toddy flycatcher, cute little guy. Now I've already had one photo of Brian doing something he shouldn't, but this one I'll forgive him for. There was a good reason he was again pointing his lens at the sky, and that was some white hunter and bats. And these guys are like the size of mice. They're just little tiny guys, cutest things you ever seen. So lots of opportunities to shoot some stuff other than birds in Costa Rica, and take those opportunities when you can. If the gentleman you saw with Brian is a great local guide. His name is Cope. Many people know him. It's him here. And he has a nice setup at his property. And this is what to expect at his place. Really great. He's got some water here. He's got lots of feeders. He's got branches. And his wife is an amazing, amazing cook. Delicious food. So great place to stop. Good place for chestnut-headed Oripendula. If you've never listened to Oripendula calls, not necessarily chestnut, but Montezuma Oripendula, they are quite interesting. So if you look here, I mean, this is something we're worried about on background, is these bright reflective leaves here on the left. So when you're going to take that shot, have a glance in the viewfinder to see if there's anything overly distracting in your image. If I moved right a little bit, or maybe angled even further to the left, I might have been able to get those out of the frame. And I did move over for this bird. This is a green honey creeper, and was able to get a nice clean dark background on this one. And sometimes you can't do much with the opportunities you're given for the infield stuff, but when you get to shoot crested owl and spectacled owl, sometimes it doesn't matter because they're just such great birds, and you just try and get in the best position. I moved around a lot to try to get these birds from being blocked and having a somewhat decent background. And one of the other benefits of using local guides is he was able to take us right to these guys. It was fantastic. So capuchin and monkey, they're quite the characters. Of course, you can't leave out the red-eyed tree frog. There's a couple spots in the area that are really, really good for shooting these guys. This is one of the reasons you want to take a flash and be able to shoot these guys at night. They're a lot easier at night than they are during the daytime. So if you don't shoot with the flash, I recommend picking one up before heading to Costa Rica if you're interested in doing any of the frogs. And got some cool reflection on this one. And we have some frogs making more frogs here on the right. This is a blonde-headed ribbon snake, another really awesome, non-venomous, cool snake we were able to find on a night hike. That's something I highly recommend, is taking a night hike with an experienced guide, because you can get some really great photo opportunities as well as just general opportunities to see some different stuff. So we will leave the Caribbean slope and head north to the northern lowlands. Another hot spot here. Here's a roadside hawk captured on the drive up to this area. And most people are pretty familiar with Laguna del Lagarto. It's one of the most famous photography locations in Costa Rica. They have an amazing king vulture blind, which is where this image was shot. And it just provides some very unique opportunities you can't find anywhere else in the country. They have an amazing setup there. They do a wonderful job of keeping distant backgrounds and very beautiful perches. It's the best place to probably photograph kill-billed toucan. Montezuma or pendula are all over the country, but they're very prevalent there. Orange-chinned parakeet, giving a little look at the reason he's named that. And green honey creeper. It's interesting to find these juvenile birds because they're transitioning plumage and they get some really crazy, beautiful teal feathers. Really great looking. Here's the fiery bill's cousin, the other arisari, which I'm totally blanking on, for collared arisari. There we go. And you know, a lot of times you're set at the same settings when you're at these feeders. The light's consistent, you've been shooting some of the same birds, but suddenly you have a flight or an action shot. So make sure you're always looking around and being ready. And when you have these chances, if you're at a low shutter speed, make sure you're panning with that bird pretty quickly and trying to follow it in. Hopefully your autofocus can catch up and get a shot like this. It's a nice headshot of a keelbill toucan and a brown-headed parrot. They have a great setup for night photography at Laguna. Here's a bat that was captured through a multi-flash setup. And, you know, look for interesting opportunities. This was just a silhouette done with a flashlight. It's a coral snake. All right. And we will head over to Arenal area. Arenal used to be the most active volcano in Costa Rica, but actually went dormant in 2003, I believe. And so now, you know, just kind of sit and wait for it to become active again. But it is a very beautiful area and a lot cooler temperatures up there too. Nice after leaving the Laguna area. Here's a black and yellow tanager. I made sure to watch for when this guy went to these amazing yellow berries. It's really fun to capture in your photography, matching plants to the birds that you're shooting. And this yellow berry really put me over the top. This is the photo I chose to keep just because of the cool matching colors here. Here's an emerald tanager and a golden hooded tanager. There are more beautiful tanagers in Costa Rica than I've seen anywhere else. Our US tanagers are actually a completely different family group than the tanagers down there, so they're not closely related. Here's a gartered trogon. Just happened to be out and stumbled onto this bird and was lucky that it was in a great spot with a great background. It's a scrub euphonia and a chestnut-billed toucan, or yellow-throated toucan. It was chestnut mandible, but it's actually gone through a name change now. This is a really rare bird. We were able to visit a property, really wonderful place, really wonderful owner there. And this is a keel-billed motmot, which is I believe it's threatened. They're having some issues with the interbreeding with rufous motmot, and they're pretty tough to find. But what a great bird! They're very interesting. It's a buff-throated saltator, and another amazing tanager, the crimson collared. I don't love to include natural or unnatural elements in my photos. I mean, this is a piece of fruit that was stuck at a feeder, but the color was so incredible, matching this green honey creeper. This is, I couldn't even resist it. It was like the same color as this lime it was eating. And the sun was coming down and hitting the top of this lime, and you can see this great reflective light, little bounce light here hitting the belly of the bird. So sometimes you have to think, you know, okay, I never shoot birds on feeders and I never shoot birds on unnatural elements, but sometimes it really works. So don't be closed-minded. Nice red-legged honey creeper. One problem with feeders, this guy's name is George. This is a coati, and he was very, very fond of the bananas that were out at the feeder. So as immediately after the feeders were filled, this guy would come on in and take bananas right off the feeders. So as often as they'd get refilled, he'd make his way in and take all the food meant for the birds off. Cool dude, though. All right. So we will make our way now to the Cinchona area. Little hard to see here, but I've got a short-tailed hawk pictured on the left side. I just really want to include this beautiful habitat in this shot. I shot it very loose in the frame to include this incredible vegetation that grows on these trees. And they actually have their own little ecosystem up there. You know, the tree grows, and then a lot of plants that don't grow anywhere else grow on top of this tree. And this is a common thing around there, and it's just stunning. You can see the waterfall here. Beautiful, beautiful spot. One of the main reasons to come to this area is the northern emerald toucanet, which are surprisingly small, not much bigger than a blue jay. They're, besides its, you know, giant bill, but really great bird, great place to spot them in that area. And here's a little expectation of kind of what feeders look like when you're sitting around and waiting. We were just eating breakfast at this location. So there's a cell phone video. It's not loading very quickly, but you can see the northern emerald toucanet here and the fruit pieces that they have sitting out. This is not loading very well, unfortunately. But it's nice. They've got, you see a white-tailed jacobin flying around here, and you know, kudos to these places for putting out feeders so people can see these amazing birds. This is probably the dullest tanager of all the Costa Rican tanagers, but beautiful nonetheless. This is the subtle palm tanager. And again, I like this little highlighted feature here in the background, one of the reasons I kept it. There are a lot of hummingbirds in Costa Rica. I was lucky to photograph 26 different species and see probably another 5 or 6 after that. It was a lot of birds, and luckily they come to feeders and you're able to take some nice shots. This is a coppery-headed emerald. And our namesake bird, the violet saberwing, huge hummingbird, sounded like a 747 when it came buzzing in. It was super loud. Banana quits are fantastic birds. They're quick, they're fast, they're pretty common, but really good looking birds. And a lot of times they hang out in the same locations that hummingbirds do. Here's a green thorntail, really great tail here. And purple-throated mountain gem. This region's great for hummingbirds. Here's a slate-throated redstart. And while this bird looks very, very green here, this is a blue vented hummingbird. You can see some of the blue here down on the tail. So multi-flash photography. So once you've done everything else, multi-flash is kind of next level. And why even bother doing it? If anyone has seen multi-flash setups or heard of it before, you know that there's a ton of equipment involved. So why bother doing it? I mean, you can see here, you've got a flash up top, you've got another flash on the right, you've got a portable background, you've got a flash down here, you've got the perch. The reason you're gonna do this is you're working in very tough light conditions. Hummingbirds' wings beat incredibly fast. And you're working at shutter speeds of, you know, a lot of times 1/100th of a second. Maybe if you're lucky, you could get into 1/500th of a second, but you're not gonna be able to freeze frame these birds. And when you use the multi-flash setup, you're setting a very low shutter speed, a low ISO, and you're using it as a main source of light, almost like in a studio. And when it flashes, it effectively freeze frames these hummingbird. The shutter speed that a flash can equal is nowhere close to our DSLR cameras. Most DSLRs can go to 1/8000th of a second. And even on a low power, these flashes, it makes it an equivalent of close to 1/20,000th of a second. So you're getting a much, much higher rate of speed. So you're able to capture really cool stuff. So when this is set up, you have a remote trigger on your camera lens, and there's two ways to do it. You can try to capture the hummingbirds as they come into the feeder, or you can be on a remote trigger and be pre-focused. And whenever they get into the sweet zone near the perch, you would just fire the remote trigger. And you end up with just some really cool shots. So here's we'll see if this video will play. This is a walkthrough of a multi-flash. We've got Brian here shooting. You can see the flashes set up here. We've got 4 flashes set up. Brian's working off the remote trigger. There's on top of the cameras, the little device that allows this to work. Got a lot of hummingbirds coming in. Sometimes they land on the perch, which isn't where they want them to be. They're very aggressive, of course, and it's hilarious to watch them fight over things. They yell at each other and things like that. You could also do some really ridiculous stuff, multi-flash. And Brian actually had a bird come in and feed right on the flower, right from his mouth. It's pretty hilarious. It's a fiery-throated hummingbird there. So here's the result. This is what you're going for. You've froze the wings, you have a beautiful perch, you have a preset background. But you know, there's issues too. There's things to think about. This is not an edited shot. This is we've got 6 birds here. We've got lesser violet ears and fiery-throated hummingbirds all fighting over the same nectar source. So you have to be very patient and try to get some separation, get just one bird in the frame, kind of wait until you have a good shot. But it's easy to shoot 2,000 or 3,000 images at one of these because it happens so quickly. You're just firing and firing and firing. And it's really great, some of the stuff you end up getting. Like these two kind of having a disagreement here about who gets the nectar. Of course, he's, you know, eventually a victor, this kind of overlord of the perch. And there are other issues. So, you know, these are battery operated flashes, and you've got to make sure that one, they're all set the same way. And Like this one, only 3 of the 5 flashes were firing. So while this would have been an amazing shot, look at the position of this bird. 2 of the flashes didn't fire. So you can see how dark this bottom part is because the flashes didn't fire. So you have to make sure you've got enough batteries and you're checking all the time. And then the flashes have to recycle every so often too. So, you know, it's a lot of work, but it's totally worth it. When you get to where, you know, if you have one flash set at a different speed than the other flashes, or they have different guide numbers, you get something called ghosting because the shutters, it's capturing a little bit more light than it should. It should all fire at the same time. That's how it freezes it. But when you have one staying on a little longer than the other, you end up with something like this. And you see kind of a shadow of where the wing is from the one flash that's doing things incorrectly. So lots of things to think about. So it's smart to maybe hire a guide that has this setup already ready to go so you can just show up and do this instead of hauling your own equipment down and trying to do it yourself, because it's a lot of equipment, a lot of time, a lot of work, but the finished images are off the hook. As you can see here, here's 2 fiery throated hummingbirds kind of having a disagreement. Fiery throated, just spectacularly tail fanned. It's an adorable little volcano hummingbird. One of my favorite images, a lesser violet ear. This is what I like to call the Jesus. Of course, our violet hummingbird or violet saberwing again. So I do want to thank big time all of our local partners in Costa Rica. We are lucky as a team to just have amazing people that we work with down there. Diego Casada, we were with most of the trip, and just an amazing guide down there, incredibly knowledgeable birder, and really made our trip above and beyond. And great guy. We're so happy to be able to partner with him. We do have some Costa Rica trips coming up. We have an Agami Heron focus tour in June. I am offering a trip very soon, should be published here pretty quickly, for this October. Kind of an intro trip. It's a shorter trip, just kind of touching on the highlights. And then I will have a more in-depth Ultimate Costa Rica trip in March of 2022. So anyone have any questions about anything specifically? We can go ahead and see if there's anything in the chat here.
There's nothing in the chat right now. So if you have questions, go ahead and toss them in the chat.
I would like to say anyone who has come back to view this program a second time, I greatly appreciate it. We were, very upset about how the last one went down, and apologize for the nonsense that happened. Obviously, some people don't have anything better to do with their lives, but really appreciate you guys coming back out to watch this tonight.
So we did get a couple questions now. What was your setup for the night photography?
So many times we used a flash. I didn't do any remote photography, multi-flash setup. A lot of the Laguna images you saw were courtesy of Brian Sweeble, who has been there before. We actually didn't make that stop on my trip, but it's a must stop for anyone who's photographing in the country. For night stuff, so you're setting a very low shutter speed. You're probably gonna need to take a flash with you and a flashlight. So many times we would focus, we'd shine the flashlight on our subject and then focus and then use the flash to fire to be able to get the correct exposure.
All right. So we also have, what ISO did you use most of the time with the slow shutter speeds?
So that's so widely variable. There's no one right answer. And that's one of the reasons photography is so tough. There's never like a go-to where you can say, well, set your shutter to this and your aperture to this and your ISO to this, and you're good to go. Like, you're always metering and trying to find what the best option is, and it's give and take. If you want a faster shutter, you need a higher ISO. At some of these very, very dark images, I had to get the ISO up between 4,000 um, 5,000 at times, and that's a pretty noisy, messy mess. Luckily, there's some programs out there along with Photoshop that I use on a regular basis. The Topaz denoise program is very nice, but it's give and take. So I'm shooting one thirtieth of a second, which is incredibly slow shutter speed, and still needing to get way up on my ISO. So you're always using your meter to try to see what you can do to get your using the tripod. You'll get that shutter speed lower and lower. Hand holding, you can't hand hold at 1/30th of a second.
The only other question we have in here is if this recording, if there will be a recording available, and the answer is yes. We'll have that on our Saberwing YouTube channel within a couple days. So without any other questions, I'll say thanks, Jamie, for presenting a great program on Costa Rica. We are glad everyone was here to join us this evening. We do have additional upcoming programs, so be sure to check out our website for those. We actually have a program about the Agami Heron and King Vulture photography trip coming next week with our guide from Costa Rica, Diego Quesada, and several others coming up after that. So be sure to check out our website to register for any of those. Thanks again for being here this evening, and we hope to see you again.
Right, thank you guys so much.
We did have someone just ask what camera you were using, Jamie. If they're still on, can you answer that real quick?
Yeah, thanks. So I was a long time Canon shooter, and last year recently switched to Nikon. So I'm currently shooting with a Nikon D850 and the Nikon 500-5.6 PF prime lens.
Perfect. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.